My name is Christopher. This happened in Nevada, near the city of Reno. I was driving late at night when I decided to stop at an old motel. The building looked abandoned, but the sign was lit, and the clerk assured me everything was fine. I got the key to room 6. At first, everything seemed normal. But when I returned in the evening, I noticed my suitcase standing by the door, though I had left it by the bed. The next day, the TV was on, though I had definitely turned it off. I asked the clerk if anyone had entered my room. He just smiled and said, "In this house, someone is always near." On the third night I woke up to a sound. At first I thought it was the wind. But no. They were footsteps. Slow, heavy, right outside the door. I lay still, my heart beating so loudly it seemed to echo in the silence. The footsteps stopped. And then, a voice. A woman's, quiet, almost a whisper. "You know I am inside." I jumped up, turned on the light. The room was empty. But on the carpet by the bed were wet footprints. I decided to set a recorder. That night it captured the door slowly opening, and a woman entering the room. Her face hidden in shadow, but long hair and a white dress visible. She approached my bed, leaned close, and whispered, "Now he will watch you." I showed the recording to the clerk. He turned pale and said that years ago a woman had lived in that room, but she had vanished. Her body was never found. I packed my things and left. But the scariest part, as I walked out of the motel, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, the hallway was empty. But on the wall, right by the door, a fresh inscription appeared. "You will return anyway." I was 23 when it happened, old enough to think I understood risk, young enough to underestimate how quietly it can arrive. I had just finished college and moved back to my hometown, a place small enough that people still waved at each other in grocery store parking lots. I didn't have a full-time job yet. I took whatever paid quickly. Pet sitting, house cleaning, errands for elderly neighbors. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me afloat. That was how I met Daniel. A woman I occasionally helped with her dogs mentioned that her cousin needed someone to stay at his house for a few days while he traveled for work. She said he lived alone, had a Labrador, and preferred someone who could sleep over instead of just stopping by. The pay was higher than usual. I hesitated, then agreed. Daniel called me later that day. His voice was calm, friendly, practiced. He explained everything clearly. Feeding schedule, walking routine, emergency numbers. Nothing about the call felt off. If anything, he sounded relieved to have found someone quickly. I met him 2 days later. He was in his early 50s, tall, neatly dressed, with the kind of smile that seemed permanently set in place. His house sat just outside town, surrounded by trees, far enough from neighbors that it felt quiet but not isolated. Inside, the place was clean but outdated. Old furniture. Muted colors. The kind of house that hadn't changed in years. He showed me where I'd sleep. A guest room on the first floor, close to the living room and bathroom. He told me to make myself comfortable. Use the kitchen. Watch TV. Treat it like my own place. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I settled into a routine. Walked the dog. Cooked simple meals. Watched shows on my laptop before bed. The house made the usual nighttime sounds, pipes, wind in the trees, the refrigerator humming. On the third night, everything shifted. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, answering texts, when something caught my eye. On the dresser across the room sat a digital clock. I didn't remember seeing it before. It looked newer than everything else, black plastic, bright blue numbers. Too modern for the rest of the room. I stared at it longer than I meant to. There was a small dark dot above the display. Perfectly round. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A light sensor. A design detail. But the longer I looked, the more uneasy I felt. The dot wasn't centered. It was angled. Pointed directly at the bed. My chest tightened. I stood up and picked it up. It was heavier than expected. When I brought it close, I heard a faint sound from inside, a soft mechanical hum. That was when the dog, who had been asleep by the door, suddenly stood and began to whine. Before I could react, I heard a sound from somewhere in the house. A door closing. Not the front door. Something deeper inside. Every instinct in my body went into overdrive. Daniel wasn't supposed to be back until the weekend. It was only Wednesday. I set the clock back on the dresser and moved toward the bedroom door, locking it just as footsteps stopped on the other side. Then his voice. Calm. Controlled. He said my name and told me not to panic. Said he'd come back early and had forgotten something in the room. Asked me to open the door so we could talk. I didn't answer. He explained quickly, too quickly, that the device wasn't a camera. That it was a motion sensor for the dog. That he hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. My hands were shaking. I stepped away from the door. His tone changed. He knocked. Then knocked harder. Then began pounding. He told me I was overreacting. That he needed me to open the door. That if I didn't, he'd have to unlock it himself. The dog started barking wildly. I looked at the window. It was low but locked. My fingers slipped as I tried to open it, panic making everything harder. Behind me, Daniel's voice grew sharp. Angry. He said if I didn't come out, he would call the police and claim I was trespassing. That was enough. I forced the window open, climbed out, and dropped onto the ground. I ran without looking back, through the trees and down the long gravel driveway, until I reached the road. I called my sister. She came immediately. I never went back. I spoke to a lawyer days later. Without physical evidence, there was little to be done. The device was gone by the time police checked the house. Daniel denied everything. Life moved on, but something in me didn't. Even now, years later, I still notice cameras. Still scan rooms without meaning to. Still remember the sound of that door closing in a house I thought was empty. And the feeling that I had been watched long before I ever knew it. At 19, Aaron Cole learned an early and dangerous lesson. Fear can be mistaken for devotion, if it is administered carefully enough. He met Ruth Miller at a roadside diner on the edge of a dying industrial town, a place where people stay, not because they want to, but because leaving requires money, resolve, or both. Ruth was younger, withdrawn, and clearly accustomed to being unseen. Her family history was a catalogue of neglect, sharp words, and long silences. Aaron recognized the vulnerability immediately, not as something to protect, but as something to use. He told Ruth that the world is cruel, but cruelty, he said, can be organized. That rules gives suffering meaning, and submission creates the illusion of safety. He spoke softly, patiently, offering structure in place of the chaos she had grown up in. In return, he demanded obedience, not all at once, but gradually, wrapping each demand in promises of protection and love. Ruth agreed, not because she fully believed him, but because this belief required strength she did not yet have. They married quickly. The ceremony was small, almost apologetic. What followed was not an explosion of violence. It was a rhythm, control, then tenderness, humiliation, then reassurance. Aaron understood contrast. He kept Ruth constantly off balance, never letting her know which version of him would appear at the end of the day. Over time, fear became familiar, and familiarity became dependence. Aaron's private obsession was order, taken to extremes. He collected old books, manuals, obscure novels about dominance and transformation. He believed a person could be reshaped if isolated long enough and pressured with precision. Ruth was his proof of concept, and also his disappointment. She endured, but did not transform. She complied, but did not become what he envisioned. The idea of bringing someone else into their lives did not arrive suddenly. It formed as a solution. Aaron spoke of a third person as a project, an experiment. Ruth resisted at first. Then, she reconsidered. She convinced herself this would change everything, that Aaron's attention would shift, that the tension in the house would ease, that she might finally live with him as a normal wife, not as a permanent subject. They chose a place where people pass through and are quickly forgotten. A rural highway, a stretch of road bordered by pine forest and abandoned rest stops. On a gray afternoon, they saw her, Emily Parker, 18 years old, a backpack, a cardboard sign with the name of a town several hours north. She looked tired, impatient, confident enough to be careless. Aaron pulled over. Less than 10 minutes passed before everything changed. Emily realized too late that the silence in the car was not neutral. It was deliberate. When Aaron turned off the road, there were no screams, no dramatic struggle. Control was asserted. efficiently and calmly. By the time they reached the house, a secluded structure, hidden from the road, Emily understood only one thing. She had crossed an invisible boundary, and there was no way back. What followed was not chaos. It was procedure. Aaron insisted on rules, on silence, on absolute compliance. He spoke as if reading from a script only he could see. Emily resisted, terrified, disoriented. She asked questions that received no answers. The gap between Aaron's expectations and reality widened rapidly. His frustration grew, not because of defiance, but because unpredictability itself offended him. The breaking point came abruptly. One moment, Aaron was explaining the necessity of obedience. The next, the situation collapsed under the weight of his own rigidity. What happened could not be undone, could not be rationalized, could not be framed as a mistake. Silence returned, heavier, denser than before. The following morning, Ruth and Aaron drove into the mountains. The road narrowed, trees closed in over the hood. They worked without speaking. The ground was cold, unforgiving. When they finished, they stood for a long time, listening to the wind moving through the branches, as if waiting for something to object. Nothing did. No investigation followed. Emily's disappearance joined the growing list of unresolved absences that accumulate quietly. Every year, Aaron learned from the failure, not remorse, but refinement. He adjusted his methods, corrected what he saw as errors. He told Ruth that next time would be different. That preparation was everything. Ruth said nothing. By then, silence was her most practiced skill. Months later, Aaron found another name, another face, another road. He believed he was close to perfecting his design. What he failed to account for: erosion, the slow, internal collapse that begins when control is maintained too long and too tightly. The end did not arrive as a dramatic confrontation. It came as a small deviation, an unlocked door, a routine disrupted, a decision Ruth made without announcing it, without fully understanding it herself. When the authorities finally arrived, they found the house stripped of its order, books scattered, notes unfinished, Aaron gone, Ruth alive, sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, staring into nothing. She did not explain. She did not need to. Some systems fail loudly, others dissolve quietly, leaving behind only the evidence of what was once carefully contained and what inevitably escaped.